If you have access to the exercise files, go ahead and open up the Hide Edges file found in Chapter 3. Now, there's another important feature that comes into play when working inside of Illustrator. And basically that is that when you click on an object, you start to see all the anchor points here, and the paths get highlighted as well. And this just makes it easy for me as a user to identify which paths are selected. Now, in this case over here where I have a group over here selected, there's lots of anchor points here. In fact, sometimes the visibility of those anchor points get in the way of me being able to interface with my design. It's hard for me maybe to visualize what this design may look like. For example, let's go ahead and dive into the actual logo Groundswell. Maybe we want to explore using different colors. Maybe instead of using black, we want to try a different color. So what I'll first do is I'll isolate the logo. Remember how we used isolation mode? I'll just simply take my black arrow and double click on the logo. And now basically if I click on this, I'm able to isolate this. I'll double click one more time. Now everything is grayed out. I can't select anything. I just have the Groundswell logo here. And let's say I want to go ahead and I want to choose a different color. So I can go over here to the little flyout menu and choose a color here for this, maybe yellow, for example, or green. But those little blue anchor points, they really kind of get in the way for how I can see that design. So I'm going to go back to black for a second here. There's a setting inside of Illustrator under the View menu called Hide Edges. And if I go over here, I see over here there's a setting here, Hide Edges. Command H or Control H is the keyboard shortcut for this. And basically when I choose that option, when I click on an object, it becomes selected, but I don't see those anchor points that are there. In fact, if I turn off the bounding box as well, so I'm going to go to the View menu and say, hide the bounding box. So now this object is selected, even though I have no visual feedback to know that it's selected. And when I mentioned before, this is a pitfall that many designers sometimes fall into. They click on something and they're thinking there's something wrong with Illustrator. I'm trying to select it and it's not becoming selected. It is selected. I know that, by the way, because I see over here that I do have a group selected right now, which is the logo type for Groundswell. And I do see where I am inside of isolation mode. In fact, if I click and drag, it moves around. I have the ability to change its colors just as I was doing before, but those anchor points now don't get in the way. They don't visually hinder work that I'm trying to get done. So I'm going to go back to black here for a second here. It's important to know that the keyboard shortcut for this is Command H or Control H. Again, if I go to the View menu, I could choose now to show edges, and now when I click on it, I can see that that's there. What's interesting about this command about hiding edges is that it's a toggle, meaning that once I turn it off, the Hide Edges command is off until I turn it back on again. This is unlike a program like Photoshop, for example, where there is the ability to hide the edges. In other words, if you make a selection in Photoshop, you know you have what they call the marching ants, that border that identifies with you where that selection border is. Well, when you press Command H or you choose Hide Edges inside of Photoshop, then you don't see those little marching ants at all, and they don't get in the way of you working inside of Photoshop. But then as soon as you go ahead and you make a new selection, that setting is turned back on again. However, in Illustrator, it's a toggle, like I said before, where once I turn it off, it stays off until I turn it back on again. So sometimes a designer will go ahead and turn it off because they want to focus on something, and then they'll forget to turn the setting back on again. And then that way, maybe 10 minutes later, they'll take a phone call, they'll walk away from their desk. When they come back, they click on something and they realize, hey, nothing's working. It's not getting selected. And again, it's just a matter of, that's the first thing to check whenever that happens in Illustrator. Make sure the Hide Edges command is not turned on. Something to think about. I'll hit the escape key to exit out of the isolation mode for that typeface. And again, as you're working, you may want to decide to turn that Hide Edges command on or off as needed.